If there were rankings for escape room movies, Cube would undoubtedly be the pinnacle of this genre. But it's not only escape rooms that can make thrilling survival movies. Take this 2021 thriller, Ascendant. For example, a girl is trapped in a 120-story elevator, and one wrong move could mean plunging to her death along with the elevator. The story begins with a bizarre kidnapping. In a pitch-black room, the girl wakes up from unconsciousness. Her arms are tightly bound, and her eyes are blindfolded, leaving her too frightened to move. Her name is Aria, a recently graduated college student. Just a few days ago, Aria and her father were in Shanghai on a vacation, what should have been a wonderful trip. But as they were about to return to their hotel after a day of sightseeing, a group of men in black suddenly appeared. The next time Aria opened her eyes, she found herself here. Once she confirmed the surroundings were safe, Aria carefully stood up. She tried to free herself from the ropes binding her arms, but they were too tight. Despite several attempts, she couldn't break free. Just as Aria was trying to figure out how to untie the ropes, a strange creaking sound echoed through the room. Before Aria could make sense of it, the elevator suddenly plummeted. The unfortunate Aria was thrown to the floor and lost consciousness. In her hazy state, Aria felt the area around her begin to slowly rise. She struggled, and to her surprise, managed to free her hands from the ropes. Still in shock, Aria hastily removed the blindfold. When she looked up, she realized she was trapped inside a tiny elevator. The elevator was still climbing, and it had reached several dozen floors. Aria thought the earlier fall must have been a malfunction, so she cautiously moved toward the control panel, holding on to the edge of the elevator. After struggling for about 2.5 minutes, Aria finally reached the panel area. She pressed the emergency button, hoping to stop the elevator, but despite several attempts, nothing happened. Just as she was getting desperate, the elevator suddenly stopped at the 80th floor. Coming down, Aria looked down and noticed that the elevator door was hollow, allowing her to see outside. She tried calling for help, hoping someone was nearby, but the outside was pitch dark, and she couldn't see anything. At that moment, Aria noticed a green symbol on the ceiling. Though she couldn't read the characters, she guessed it might be an emergency exit in the elevator. She attempted to open the ceiling hatch, but because of her height, she couldn't reach it. She tried using the nearby handrail for leverage, but it was too slippery to hold onto. As Aria struggled, she realized that her phone was still in her pocket. She quickly pulled it out and discovered several new voicemails from her mother. She clicked on one. The voicemail was filled with her mother's desperate screams. Upon hearing her mother's cries, Aria suddenly remembered to call the police. She quickly dialed 911, but when the operator answered, Aria explained that she was trapped in an elevator in Shanghai. The officer thought it was a prank call and hung up. Just as Aria was about to redial, a loud crash came from above. Before she could react, the elevator plummeted again. Thankfully, the fall only lasted a few seconds before the elevator suddenly stopped. Aria looked up at the panel and noticed the elevator had dropped several floors. At that moment, she spotted a camera in the corner, and she thought it was connected to a surveillance room. She waved her arms frantically, trying to attract the attention of whoever was watching, but despite her efforts, the camera showed no response. With no other choice, Aria turned her attention to the elevator doors and pushed them with all her strength, hoping to open them. To her surprise, as soon as she applied force, the elevator suddenly plunged again. Luckily, the fall only lasted a brief moment. Aria thought she might have accidentally triggered the fall by pushing the door, causing the elevator to slide down. In frustration, she remembered the emergency button near the door and tried pressing it. This time, there was a response.
Hello?
您好，有什么紧急情况吗？
Do you speak English?
请稍等。
Aria quickly explained her situation to the operator, telling them she was trapped in the elevator. The operator checked the system and discovered that the elevator was in a building under construction, and that the elevator was not even operational yet. Before Aria could say anything else, the elevator suddenly began to plummet again. The rapid descent threw Aria into the air, and as she watched the floors passing by quickly, she thought she was done for. But just as the elevator reached the 40th floor, the falling speed suddenly slowed down. Aria was slammed to the floor by the sudden deceleration and lost consciousness. It was unclear how much time had passed, but eventually, Aria woke up. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw a shadow at the elevator door. Leaning forward, she noticed that there was a floor level just outside the door. She hurried over and pushed against the door, and after several minutes of effort, a small crack appeared. Aria tried to crawl through the gap, but just as she began to climb, the floor indicator on the panel started flashing again. It was hard to tell how much time passed before Aria came to her senses. She looked up and realized the elevator was once again suspended in midair. She took out her phone, hoping to make a call for help. But when she checked her phone, she found there was no signal. As she searched for a signal, a sudden bright light appeared behind her. Turning around, she saw several men standing in front of her. At first, Aria thought it was part of an elevator ad. But when the men turned around, she was shocked to see her father, Richard, hanging from a rope. The leader of the group, a man named Yaroslav, pointed at the screen and demanded, "Where is the engineer?" Upon hearing their conversation, Aria realized she was being held hostage. Despite her situation, Richard remained silent, even when Yaroslav glared at him. Seeing that Richard refused to speak, Yaroslav signaled to his men. They manipulated the control panel, and the elevator began plummeting rapidly again. Just as the elevator was about to reach the 10th floor, the descent suddenly stopped. Before Aria could react, the elevator began to ascend rapidly. The violent up and down motion left Aria disoriented and dizzy. Despite the chaos inside the elevator, Richard still said nothing. Perhaps the speed was too much. As the screen went blank, when the elevator finally stopped, Aria let out a sigh of relief. She began to stand up, only to hear her phone ringing. Looking down, she saw it was her uncle Jack calling. Aria quickly answered the call and told Jack about her being trapped in the elevator and her father being held captive. Jack told her not to worry, that they were on their way and would rescue both of them soon. From Jack, Aria learned the true reason behind her kidnapping. It turned out that Aria's father was a CIA agent, and the Yaroslav was searching for was an extremely important person. The engineer held the key to a weapon capable of destroying the world, and only her father knew his whereabouts. If they revealed the engineer's location, the consequences would be unimaginable. The screen flickered back to life. In a panic, Aria quickly hid her phone behind her, and on the screen, Richard was being pushed forward. Yaroslav intended to use Aria to force Richard to reveal the engineer's location, but even after being brutally beaten, Richard remained silent. Yaroslav then pulled out a knife and, right in front of Aria, cut off her father's ear. Hearing her father scream in pain, Aria was left in shock. But despite losing an ear, Richard still refused to speak. Seeing that torturing Richard was getting him nowhere, Yaroslav turned his attention back to Aria. He ordered his men to repeatedly make the elevator descend at high speed. As the elevator fell, the screen cut out again. When Aria regained consciousness, the elevator had risen to above the 80th floor. At that moment, she felt a faint cold breeze at her feet. Looking down, she noticed that the steel plate beneath her had been torn open during the rapid descent, creating a small gap. Aria kicked it hard, and to her surprise, the steel plate broke open. Peering through, she saw a gap ahead, resembling an exit. However, the exit was still some distance away. Aria attempted to crawl out of the elevator and climb along the beam to reach the exit, but just as she was halfway out, the elevator suddenly started moving again. Fortunately, there was a notch in the beam where she was standing, allowing her to avoid being caught by the moving elevator. Once the elevator descended, Aria tried to use the elevator's steel rails to climb toward the exit, but the large screen inside the elevator turned on again. Fearing that Yaroslav would notice her escape, Aria had no choice but to climb back into the elevator. Seeing her father, bruised and battered, Aria gave an okay hand gesture, relieved that his daughter was safe. Richard's tense heart finally eased, but before they could exchange a word, the screen cut out once more. As Aria considered trying to escape through the gap, she received another call from Jack. Jack informed her that the CIA agents were on their way and told her to keep Yaroslav occupied for as long as possible. Before Aria could respond, the screen behind her suddenly lit up. Yaroslav had realized that Aria was on the phone. Furious, he again activated the elevator's descent. Yaroslav reappeared on the screen, pointing a gun at Richard, demanding Aria call the CIA and force them to reveal the engineer's location. If she didn't get the answer in 5 minutes, both she and her father would die. To buy some time, Aria reluctantly dialed Jack's number, but Jack had no idea where the engineer was hidden, so he advised Aria to pretend to persuade Richard into revealing the information. In order to stall for time, Aria agreed with this plan. She hung up and relayed to Yaroslav that even the CIA didn't know the engineer's whereabouts, but she added that she could try to convince her father to speak. Hearing this, Yaroslav reluctantly agreed. He gave Aria 10 minutes if she couldn't get Richard to talk in that time. Both of them would be killed. As Yaroslav left, Aria questioned her father about the engineer, but Richard revealed something shocking. There was no engineer. The entire story had been fabricated to protect a weapon. The so-called weapon was a child with extraordinary powers, and that child was Aria. Aria was not Richard's biological daughter. She had been created by scientists as part of an experiment to develop superpowered humans. Her ability was the power to deconstruct any material into atoms. The CIA had realized how dangerous Aria's abilities were, so they assigned Richard to protect her. However, the information somehow leaked, and Yaroslav's group found out about Aria, which led to the kidnapping. Upon learning that she was the weapon, Aria was momentarily stunned and couldn't process the truth. Before she could speak, Yaroslav's mocking laughter echoed through the phone. Aria turned around and saw Yaroslav's face appear on the screen. It turned out that Yaroslav had purposely left the phone for Aria. He had used a voice changer to impersonate Jack, tricking Richard into revealing the secret. As Aria listened to the voice on the phone, she realized she had been deceived. When Richard learned that Aria had been exposed, he urged her to quickly open the memo on her phone. At his prompt, Aria opened the memo and discovered an audio file. However, the recording was strange. It wasn't a conversation at all. As Aria listened, she suddenly lost consciousness. Meanwhile, Yaroslav, now aware that Aria was the weapon, he killed Richard without a second thought. Just as Yaroslav tried to regain control of the elevator, he realized it was descending rapidly. He attempted to stop it, but the controls were unresponsive. In the elevator, Aria, still hearing the strange recording, felt something awakening within her. A strange energy surged through her, and with it, everything around her began to disintegrate and shatter. Seeing the elevator lose control, Yaroslav ordered his men to investigate. When they entered the elevator to go down, the doors suddenly shut, trapping them inside. Aria's face appeared on the walls, and before anyone could react, the elevator plunged downward at high speed. However, Yaroslav showed no fear as his men vanished before his eyes. He calmly dialed a number.
Мне нужна новая команда.
Ё-моё, что происходит?
It was clear now that Yaroslav had known about Aria's true identity all along. His goal had been to activate the power hidden within her. And with that, the story comes to an end. This was the full plot of the suspense thriller Ascendant. That's all for today's sharing. See you next time.